Tourette's podcast is not a medical advice show. It's a show about experiences. In the course of that, we may talk about medications or therapies or stories from the doctor's office, but don't mistake any of that for medical advice or direction. It's not. Get that only from people or places licensed or certified to give it, not from a massively fun and action-packed podcast about our life experiences. Such as?
Sometimes one of the challenges is having to identify, okay, what is what? What is a tic? What is an obsession? What is anxiety? And how do they all interact with each other? And maybe, I don't know if it really matters to know the difference, but I think they all just really overlap and it can be challenging.
This is Tourette's podcast, made possible with support of the Tourette Association of America and part of the Geeks Rising Network. Hello and welcome to episode 5 of Tourette's podcast, season 8. Breaking news for people who didn't see the Tourette Association update over the past week. That's right, we have some hard news to share from the world of Tourette Syndrome, and I'm just going to read it straight to you. And this comes from Amanda Talty, president and CEO of the Tourette Association, and someone I'm stoked to call a friend. Here's the latest from Amanda. The Tourette Syndrome and tic disorder research community released new prevalence numbers that we are excited to share with you for the first time. According to a recent study by the CDC, 1 in 50 school-aged children have Tourette syndrome or a persistent tic disorder. This is more than double the amount that experts previously believed. This monumental finding reinforces what we at the TAA and in the TS community already knew. Tourette syndrome and tic disorders are widespread and impact many more people than the coverage and funding of our community would indicate. This study serves as an important resource to help end the negative stigma and demonstrate the truth about TS and tics. These findings also showcase the importance of our mission, elevate awareness, and enable us to secure more funding to provide essential support to those who need us. Without your continued efforts, we could never have learned this crucial and potentially life-saving information. For this, we sincerely thank you. Keep your eyes out for the upcoming emails and social media posts with more information about this groundbreaking discovery. We encourage you to share this new statistic far and wide. Word of mouth is a critical means of building awareness and acceptance for our community. Those who are unfamiliar with Tourette syndrome or think of it in a negative light will learn just how widespread it is. They will learn TS is not a joke, but a serious and abundant condition among not only children, but adults as well. Help us spread the truth about TS and tics. Help us show the world our community is unstoppable. And that's from Amanda Talty, president and CEO of the Tourette Association of America. Again, just to repeat the statistic, brand new statistic, 1 in 50 school-aged children have Tourette syndrome or a persistent tic disorder. More than double the amount that experts previously believed. Spread it around. That definitely lends credence to what we've been saying, that Tourette is not a rare, it may be a rare experience. If I have Tourette syndrome, which I do, someone with Tourette syndrome, I don't know a lot of people around me who have it, but that doesn't mean it's a rare disorder. There's just more we keep learning, and I appreciate the TAA spreading this information. Again, this is a study from the CDC, and I will link to it in the show notes with this episode at tourettespodcast.com. Question here from someone who would like to remain anonymous, which I respect. This is a listener question, and this is a hard question I'd like your help answering. And the question is, when does advocacy for Tourette's turn into overcompensation? So that's the question. And from other correspondence I've had with this questioner, with this listener, I think another way of asking it is, are we kidding ourselves with overcompensating positivity when what we have in our lives is really, truly challenging as a disorder? And, do we wade into what people sometimes call toxic positivity? That's my take on the question. And in short, I don't know the answer. It's probably somewhere around the intersection of being so stoked and positive about our condition that we marginalize the people experiencing hardships or make them feel like they're not part of the narrative or part of the solution because they're experiencing the negatives and don't want to be falsely happy about it. We don't want to leave people behind by being so rah-rah cheerleader about tic disorders that we're being unfairly unrealistic to the people we're supposed to get it right for. And it would be even worse if our message got lost in it. And this is obviously not to say, don't be positive and live our best lives out loud. I'm saying let's individually figure out how to be as happy as we can be. It's about quality of life for us individually. What's good for me might be a terrible idea for you, vice versa. And I'm starting to lose the thread a little bit, but it's a great question. I'd love to know your thoughts on it. When does positivity about our situation in the Tourette community become toxic? And what are maybe the downsides of over-positivity? It's a great question. Love to hear your take on it. tourettespodcast@gmail.com. And I want to get right to this week's excellent conversation between Jhonelle and Shawna. We have a superb guest host this week in my friend Jhonelle Bean, and she's in conversation with our guest, Shawna. And this one, it's so good. Let me just read you some of the notes I took while listening to their talk. Being accused of shoplifting because of your supposedly peculiar tics, what outsiders might think is peculiar behavior, being looked at, being laughed at, basically rendered socially unacceptable as a human. When you're in a position like that, speaking generally, what do? Do you take the time to educate everybody around you? Let's just say you're at the food court at the mall or something. You just want to have a meal. And this is happening to you. You know, your Tourette putting you on display, so to speak, and people in kind of hive mind fashion adopt this, there's something wrong with this person. Do you just hang with that? Do you tell the people you're okay and let it be? What do you do? What's effective? When everyone around you is forming the wrong judgment to the point where it might be a situation of it being something like, if you see something, say something. Like, you don't want to be on the wrong side of if you see something, say something. Does that turn it into you against them? You as Touretter versus the judgments of everybody around you? There's some conversation ahead getting into this. I also like the points that Shawna makes about identifying or questioning what's what with your own situation. Like, what am I doing that's an expression of OCD versus a tic, for instance? Is having a tic disorder an advantage in some ways? I'm excited about you hearing this one. I love the tone of it, so I'm going to get out of your way and let you listen. Here's my friend Jhonelle talking with Shawna.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Tourette Podcast. My name is Jhonelle, and I have the wonderful opportunity of being the guest host for this episode. I have been on the Tourette Podcast episode before, season 7, episode 3, and I'm super excited to be back and bring on a new guest, somebody that I had the wonderful privilege of meeting at the Tourette Association's National Conference back in May. So everybody say hello to Shawna.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yes. If you could, can you tell us maybe more about yourself, your age, or maybe where you're at in the world?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm 37. I grew up in Wisconsin, so in the Midwest here. So that's where I spent a majority of my life living, part of the time on the West Coast as well.
Oh, cool. That's awesome. Okay. Can you tell us a little bit more about maybe some of your hobbies or what you do for work?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I like nature. So I like things such as camping, hiking, going on bike rides, but also just, trying to make time to take care of myself and do some relaxing too. I think, so for work, I do mental health therapy. So I work with folks, kids, teens, adults, couples, in that field. So I've been doing that work since graduated in 2017 and been doing it for about 5 years.
Oh, very cool. That's awesome. We love to see it. Gotta love those that help within our mental health, especially, dealing with Tourette Syndrome and comorbidities. Mental health is definitely something that I feel should be talked about more. So, just kind of want to have a conversation with you about your Tourette's journey. When did it start for you? What kind of were like your first tics that popped up? Mm-hmm. And how did the people around you respond to that?
Yeah. So I've actually had tics for as long as I can remember. Okay. I don't remember a time in my life where they haven't existed. Mm-hmm. So, as we know, tics can change over time. Right. And so I think early on, when I was pretty little, I remember doing things like hopping, touching my arm, having to look at my hands. And And, I think I even had some eye rolling when I was little. That also has, come up off and on over the years. So I think those were kind of some of the early signs of Tourette's, and kind of how it manifested for me. And of course, it's then changed over the years. And sometimes it's like tics will come back too, where I had them years ago, and then they'll come back and just look really different over time. And so I think that's something that I also like to help people understand too, that it can just look so different for different folks, and it can show up in so many different subtle ways.
Yeah, of course. Did your parents or guardians notice your tics from a young age?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So for me, growing up in my family, it was actually, I would say it was noticed, but actually it wasn't really talked about or understood throughout my whole life growing up. It was talked about in some ways, more in terms of, I think, family members just being really confused as to what was going on. It was never named Tourette's for me. And so it was something that I had noticed, family had noticed, but it wasn't talked about in the sense of we understand what it is and how we can help. And so I think for me, that led me to feel, I think, pretty alone. And I remember thinking when I was quite young that I was the only person in the world that had going on what I had going on. And I didn't have a name for it. I had no understanding of it, and neither did my family. And there's not hard feelings about that now toward my family. I think they just did the best they could with what they had, and they just didn't have an understanding. And so now it looks different being an adult and being able to have conversations with my family and being able to have their support. And that has, made a big difference for me.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that they've been able to recognize what it is now and, support you in that way. That is definitely something that's needed. So was there a specific age that you were diagnosed at?
So, as I mentioned, so growing up my whole life, I think there was this experience of just not understanding, feeling like I was alone, feeling like I had to change a part of myself. And then I was able to get a diagnosis officially. It was at some point in my 20s when I had, just meeting with different providers, different doctors, not even really about Tourette's, but just whatever else I was presenting with at the time, going to see medical providers. It was something that I think I had named because actually I self-diagnosed when I was a young adult. And so I think providers just kind of validated it at that time. Like, yep, you've got Tourette's. And then, I had gotten official diagnoses over time, I think probably sometime in my late 20s, even in my early 30s. But it was actually, I self-diagnosed myself. It was in a college course when I was a young adult. I think it was a psychology course. And there was a video that we were watching in class about Tourette's. And that was the first time I had ever heard of it. Although I had lived with this experience my whole life, I remember feeling like that's what I have. And that was really this revelation for me at the time. But it was something I never talked about. I never told anybody about it. And again, if we think about just my own context, it wasn't really talked about in my life. So I didn't probably have the language or the understanding or anything to really, to be able to name it and to feel like I could have the support. Maybe I just didn't trust that I would at that time. So then feeling like I had to carry this almost like this secret around with me that I have this experience, but I didn't know how to talk about it, or I felt like I couldn't talk about it.
Yeah, I feel like I've talked to several different people, myself included, who all have had a large gap between when their tics first started for them and when they were diagnosed. And a lot of that, I think, comes from just people not being aware, like you said, of what a tic disorder looks like, of what the condition could be. So you just kind of go throughout life, throughout your years saying, I don't know, my body just kind of does this. Just kind of does this thing. But then it's not till, way later, like for me, it was about a 10-year gap from when the tics first started to when I finally was able to, get a diagnosis. And I felt almost kind of like invalid throughout those years that I did not have a diagnosis, because I couldn't necessarily say for sure. Like, yeah, I was pretty sure that I had Tourette syndrome, but a doctor didn't say that. So I kind of felt invalid. But I just want to let anybody who might be listening to this that might be in that stage know that your experience, that what you're dealing with, is still valid. You do still, like, if you are having tics or other comorbidities of Tourette syndrome, and you just have not either had the opportunity financially to see a specialist or whatever the case may be, it doesn't mean that your experience is not as valid as somebody who does have an official diagnosis. So I just wanted to put that out there for anybody who might have been in that stage, because for me and for many others, it's a very long stage, very long time period in our life. So, let's see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I just want to echo that. I mean, absolutely, it's everyone's experience is valid, whether it's diagnosed or not diagnosed, whether other people support you or not. And I think just really knowing that you are truly not alone. There's so much support that I've had to really discover within, I would say, recent years. So I spent a majority of my life really not getting support, and over time, I would disclose to folks that are in my personal life, people close to me, but really there's still this sense of kind of that part too. So just knowing that you can talk about it as well when you're ready.
Yeah, that's really good. It is very true. Have you noticed in your life, like, whether it be with friends, if you're out in public, at work, what have you seen people's response be to you ticking? If I remember correctly, when meeting you, I think you have more motor tics usually than vocal tics, kind of like myself. But what's people's response been like whenever you are ticking in public or at work?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is something I think that has been a journey I've been on in terms of just what it looks like to talk about it and to disclose, and knowing when to disclose, how to disclose. So when I was a young adult, of course, when I was an adolescent growing up, I never mentioned it to anybody really. But even as a young adult, when I kind of had an understanding, at least a little bit, or I was developing that understanding, it was still not really talked about with employers, in public spaces. And so that's been something I've had to develop over time. And I'm still learning, to, I guess, know that it's okay to talk about it, and then to know that it's okay to own it and to name it. And so I think for me, one of the things I'm starting to find helpful is maybe it's even disclosing it in a job interview, or with folks that are maybe like a supervisor. For me, it's helpful to have more of the one-on-one conversations. I know everybody's different, but I know maybe for folks it might be disclosing it to the whole group. I think for me, that's just felt a little bit more uncomfortable. So I like to have more individual conversations like that when it comes to the workspace. But then I think one of the things I've run into is feeling like, okay, so maybe I haven't disclosed to this particular person. Say we're in a work meeting, we're having a conversation, and I run into the challenge sometimes of, okay, this person doesn't know about my experience with Tourette. So how do I name it? Do I have to name it? I don't feel like I have to justify or explain my experience, but yet it's okay to talk about it. So just to help people to understand. So just kind of navigating that has been a journey. And I think in public spaces, it looks a little different for me. I think that that's something I still struggle with a bit. There have been, yeah. So, I mean, there have been times where I have been what I perceive as, being accused of shoplifting because of my tics. I have been told I can't purchase any kind of alcohol because they told me that I already looked like I was under the influence when I wasn't. I was getting done with work. I was sober, but because I had some movements in the store, it might have appeared that I was staggering or whatever they noticed. I'm not sure. So, I've been kind of looked at, I've been laughed at. I think people don't really understand the experience of it. So I'm not holding that against anybody, but I think, when you have a movement that is socially unacceptable, really, so say I'm, throwing my arm out in the middle of a restaurant or, people look at you like, what are you doing? And
Right.
I guess I oftentimes just sit with it and I don't say anything because I'm thinking, okay, I have to save my energy a bit and not share it with every single stranger.
Right.
But yet it's just finding that balance. And, walking on the street, I have a tick where I, move my head down quite a bit and I'll get a lot of, oh, bless you. Or I have a tick where
Gosh, like it's a sneeze.
yeah, where I grab kind of grab my ankle, when I'm walking. And I get told a lot like, oh, maybe you've got, do you have something in your sandal? So I think in those instances, I find myself just smiling and nodding and saying, I'm okay, thank you. But it's just everyone's experience is so different again. And for me, that's the approach I've taken. I think I'm working on getting to a place of just feeling like I can name it. But I think also it's protecting my energy too and feeling like I don't have to name it in every instance.
Yeah. No, that's definitely a thing. Like I feel like there have been times where there are moments where, if it's somebody that you're gonna, or at least I feel, if it's somebody that you're gonna be with more regularly, I would disclose it sometimes. And then if it's just in public, like if, like the person said, oh, do you have something in your sandal? Then I'm just like, oh yeah, just gonna walk by. So I don't have time to give the spiel right now. But even for me, there have been moments at work where I did not say anything. Like I remember one time I was sitting in a room with people. I worked at a clinic with children, and they were sitting there eating like snack or lunch, and one of the kids was listening to a song, and I have a tick where I'll jerk my head to the left side twice and then the right side twice, and that's like one tick. And I did that a couple times in a row, and the other staff member that was there was like, "Oh, you really like this song, huh?" And I don't know why she thought I really liked that song, because it was like, I don't know, like Head, Shoulders, Knees, and Toes or something of that origin. But I was like, yeah, I like to dance. Like I just didn't have the energy that day to say, oh no, actually I just didn't. So I was like, oh yeah, I like to dance. But it is definitely a balance and kind of a challenge trying to figure out when to say things. I know you brought up like with employees as well, or if you're interviewing for a job, like that's always a battle of, do I say something up front or do I not say anything? And I know I don't necessarily think either response is wrong, with whatever you feel most comfortable with. But I know for me, with my new job that I have now, I did suppress throughout my interview, as it was like virtual. And then once I did get the job, I did let them know. And since then, I've been able to, make presentations on it with the team at work and talk about what it's like to have a tic disorder. And it turned out really well. So it's not really, everybody's experience with that is different. And there's definitely a balance. Do you have any friends like that maybe they didn't know at first, like you mentioned, and then you finally opened up to them about it? Have you had that experience?
Yes, I would say looking back at relationships, friendships over the years, like I said, disclosing was something I didn't always do, and I still don't always. So I think there had been friendships where I had for a long time before I really even said anything. And, still folks in my life who I haven't shared this with. Right. And so I think sometimes I would say most of the time people have had pretty supportive reactions. So, I think a part of it's just knowing what it is. And sometimes I've gotten feedback like, that's just Shawna. It's that's just who she is. It's nothing, we didn't think anything of it, or we're just used to it. Or,
Right.
I kind of assumed that you had it, but, we just didn't, you didn't say anything. So I didn't mention it. So or maybe people just didn't know at all, because I think there's also a lot of misperceptions out there within our society, miseducation, a lot of myths out there. So yeah, it's just been different, I think, with every relationship. I've learned, to just kind of, I'm getting back, I'm kind of working on having some of those conversations early on and just being able to name it, because I feel like then it just takes some of that stress away from me, because I find myself feeling like, okay, I have Tourette's, I have this movement disorder that people don't really understand. And it's almost like I'm holding this secret. And then I feel like I have to suppress it because the person doesn't understand. They're going to ask, they're going to wonder what's going on. They're going to think I'm anxious. They're going to think all these things. And I kind of create this story in my head. So I'm trying to just learn to just name it. And so just to have a conversation about it. And oftentimes it goes better than I expect. Kind of feeling like I shouldn't have to also be suppressing the tics too. And I think a lot of us go through that, where it's like we do in some ways because there's just social stigmas around it, but yet it's that balance of I shouldn't have to. I should be able to just show up as I am in the world and not have to worry about making people comfortable or not based on who I am.
Exactly. I mean, it's something that's involuntary, just like if somebody feels the need to sneeze, you can't just tell yourself, sneeze right now. You also can't just say, no, we're not going to sneeze right now. And nobody really looks at people weird when they have to sneeze or hiccup or cough or different things like that. So it shouldn't be something that's kind of like taboo and out of this world for us either, because it's something that's involuntary that our bodies feel the need to do. Just like if people, like I said, have to sneeze or hiccup. So yeah, I definitely think that it's a balance with, not trying to just continuously suppress. I know I've learned to kind of like mask my tics. So I will still let the tic out, but try to find a way to make it look more socially, quote unquote, normal. So I know
I'm with you on that. That's been, I'm just kind of chuckling a little bit because I can totally relate to what you're saying. And it's hard to have to do that because I have this awareness at the same time that I shouldn't have to do that. We should just all be able to own it and be okay with it. But the reality is that, I guess most of the time in my life, I'm the only person that I know of that has Tourette's, right? Unless you go to something like a Tourette's conference, it's really just me. And so there's just a lot of people that just don't understand the experience. So I think one challenge I've also noticed come up is I feel like even if I disclose that I have Tourette's, I feel like still there's folks don't always understand that tics and, movements can change over time.
Right.
And sometimes I find myself feeling like, okay, so this person or these people maybe they've witnessed these particular kinds of movements that they identify, okay, that's what Tourette's looks like. That's what Shawna has, without really knowing that it actually can look a lot of different ways and it can look different at different times. So then sometimes I feel like I have to suppress those tics that are more socially unacceptable or that are against what people maybe recognize me as when it comes to me having tics. And, that's an experience I'm really trying to work through because, again, it's that idea of I shouldn't have to do that. But yet it's also part of the reality. Yeah,
it really is. It's, I guess, if somebody knows you or, knows your Tourette's kind of shows as like, maybe, like you said, bending over and touching your ankle, or maybe raising your arm. And then all of a sudden one day, I know when I get new tics sometimes that are kind of out there, I'm like, oh boy, here we go. I have one where I bang on the table, which you can imagine is not necessarily socially the best in every situation, like the movies or a restaurant or places where you have to be quiet. And it looks, if people don't know, it just looks like I'm doing it to be annoying or, to bring attention to myself. But it's really just a tic. And it's like, my friends, thankfully they understand. And they're like, oh, and I'll just say, oh, it's a new tic. And they're like, oh, wow. But, yeah, people kind of have this idea in their head of what they think it looks like. And then when a new tic comes or an old tic goes away, they're like, what happened?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's so freeing to be around people that really, truly understand, though. I'm not sure if that's an experience you can relate with, but folks that are really a part of my, close circle, it's like, I don't feel like I have to explain myself in that way. And that's so refreshing, honestly, because it is stressful, just living with Tourette's, having to explain Tourette's, everything about it. I mean, people don't always realize the stress that comes with it. I've broken things. I've thrown things. I've hit people accidentally. Like all this is on accident. And so people that really know me, it's like, okay, it's no big deal, but others, that's again in public spaces or with people that maybe don't know me as well, that don't know my story. It's like, how do I explain that to people? And then those are the tics I feel like I have to suppress.
Right. Yeah, no, I feel that.
We will be right back. The Tourette Association of America is the premier nonprofit working to raise awareness, advance research, and provide ongoing support for those with Tourette Syndrome or a tic disorder. With a network of over 130 chapters, support groups, and centers of excellence, the TAA engages with communities across the nation in an effort to provide tools, webinars, workshops, and support for all seeking assistance. As a primary sponsor of Tourette's podcast, the TAA supports authentic conversations showcasing the diverse representation of the Tourette community. To learn more, go to tourette.org. That's TOURETTE.org. The Tourette Association of America. Uncontrollable, unstoppable.
Do you deal with any of like the comorbid conditions that usually come along with Tourette syndrome? Usually people deal with, a number of things from OCD to ADHD to depression, anxiety, handwriting difficulties. Do you experience anything like that?
Yes. So there could even be other experiences beneath the surface too. So they have the Tourette iceberg too, where it's like there's all these different experiences and layers to it that I might not even be aware of all of it. I'm still trying to understand that for me. But from my understanding right now, I also live with anxiety and OCD.
Okay.
And so, everything kind of intersects with the other. And it can be a lot to manage. And I think for me, the anxiety and the OCD has really, showed up in a much stronger way in my life the past, I would say recent years, few years. So it's possible it was there before and it just wasn't showing up in the way that it is now. So I'm really trying to figure out how to best support myself through that, how to understand my own symptoms, my own triggers. So it can be a lot. And I think for me, sometimes one of the challenges is having to identify, okay, what is what is a tic, what is an obsession, what is anxiety, and how do they all interact with each other? And maybe, I don't know if it really matters to know the difference, but I think they all just really overlap and it can be challenging.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I know, like you said, there's the iceberg image that the Tourette Association of America has on their website that show like motor tics and verbal tics or vocal tics on the surface. But then underneath the iceberg, there's things like you said, like anxiety or OCD. And those can increase and fuel your tics, or your tics can increase and fuel your anxiety. Like it is kind of hard to tell which one comes first. Like, am I ticking more because I'm anxious, or am I anxious because I'm ticking more?
Oh yes, the lovely cycle.
Yeah, for sure. But I do notice that for most people that I've spoken with and gotten to know, the things that are kind of under the surface, like OCD or depression, anxiety, different things like that, tend to be the things that bug the person with Tourette syndrome more, or more intensely than tics do. But everybody's different. But I've kind of noticed that. And yeah, like you said, it kind of fuels each other. And you're like, which one is this? Where does it come from? I'm not sure. Do you have anything that you notice can either trigger your tics to increase or kind of trigger your OCD or anxiety?
Yeah. So again, I'm still really trying to build that understanding for myself. But some things I've noticed that trigger my tics. I mean, I can think of a handful of things right now. And so that might be things like heat, stress, excitement, if I'm feeling, pressure on time, time constraints.
Right.
I think also talking about it can sometimes trigger my tics. Being around others who are ticking. I know we had noticed that and talked about that at the Tourette conference, is just being around others who are ticking. It's like, whoa, this is a new experience for me. And it really came out in a much stronger way. So I think also if I'm feeling confined in any way, I don't like things like sweaters, turtlenecks, things on my neck. I feel kind of trapped, and that I think can trigger my movements. Also for me, things like activity, exercise, cooking. I know some folks talk about how when they're doing activities that they enjoy, that actually alleviates the tics or they don't come on as strong. And for me, I find it's the opposite. So when I'm doing things, it's actually really, really challenging. It's like when I'm cooking and trying to cut things, chop up vegetables, it's like my hand tics come out really strongly. Or if I'm trying to exercise, those tics I was talking about with my grabbing my ankle and my feet, that comes out really strongly. So I would say those are some of the triggers. In terms of anxiety and OCD, I think I'm still trying to discover what those are. I mean, maybe similar in some ways. I think stress is always going to be a trigger for me. Things like that. So I'm still exploring that part.
Yeah, I feel like for me, it's interesting you said heat. I know a few people that heat, like being hot, kind of triggers their tics. But for me, it's the opposite. I still have yet to meet somebody who has more tics when they're cold, not when they're hot. But yeah, when I'm cold, my tics are like all over the place, especially even if I love swimming, but if I first jump in the pool or something and, the water's cold, I'll take a lot when I first get in the pool too.
Yeah.
I feel like tic triggers are excitement, anticipation of things happening, like good or bad related. I'll start to tic more, as well as develop new tics. I had one, I was looking forward to something coming up, and I developed like a breathing tic where I would inhale pretty sharply, just kind of like that anticipation of the event. I feel like when it comes to being around other people with tics and, talking about it, I feel like that probably is a trigger for everybody, just because, tics are so suggestible. I remember being at the conference and being in a room, which was, it was great to be able to not have to suppress during a presentation. Because, you're sitting in these sessions throughout the day, and usually, in public or in a session somewhere else, you'd be wanting to try to suppress them. But at the Tourette conference, it was great because everybody was ticking. But yeah, it was definitely interesting to maybe hear one person somewhere in the room clap, and then 4 other people clap as well. Definitely suggestible kind of tics like that with triggers. But I feel like for me with activities, it depends. There are times that I can just do stuff like cook or, clean or whatever and not really tic or brush my teeth. But there are other times that if I'm already ticking a lot, I guess the anxiety pops in oh, we're cooking, we're ticking, or we're doing this. Please don't hurt yourself or don't get burned or something like that. So for me, it's kind of 50-50.
Yeah. And I was thinking about too, the OCD that I noticed that has, I think, been a bit more intense for me in recent years. I think one of the things I do notice with that is bedtime. I think kind of the bedtime routine is a big trigger for that one. So, making sure I'm checking, doors are locked, checking the stove to make sure it's off. Just these kinds of things that I think maybe lots of people do that. I'm not sure, but it's like to an amplified degree,
right.
and it can be actually all of these things together. It's actually really stressful and really exhausting because you don't want to spend all this time checking the stove for minutes every night or 10 minutes, but it's just like, it's like you can't move past it. It's just some of these moments are actually really challenging.
Yeah, for sure. I have tics that increase as I'm, like when I go to sleep, and kind of tics that like only happen when I'm in bed, where I kind of raise my head off the pillow really quickly. And then I also have one where I'll just move my legs around. I don't know how to explain it. It's almost like if you had a bug on you and you start wiggling them to try to get it off. It's pretty much only happens in bed. So for me, the bed, like laying down in and of itself can be a trigger. So yeah, it's interesting. And then, like you said, like dealing with the OCD on top of that, of having to check things as you're prepping to go to bed and just wanting to, maybe lay down and relax. That is an additional challenge. Do you think of or know of any, for you personally, any upsides or downsides to having Tourette syndrome?
Yeah, let me start with the upsides.
Sure.
I think it has shown me and is still teaching me more self-compassion and just really trying to be gentle with myself, accepting of myself. And I think even in a way, it's teaching me to feel empowered too, right? That this is a part of my identity that I've really had to learn to come to terms with, and learning to accept it and embrace it and not just push it aside and ignore it and pretend like it's not there. So in a way, I think claiming who we really are can be really freeing, can be really empowering, and can be really healing. So that's a journey that I'm still on. And I think some of the disadvantages to having Tourette's, there's a lot of misunderstanding and a lot of miseducation out there when it comes to tic disorders. And I think also, just again, we're talking about how others are perceiving us. So perceptions of others and social stigmas, that's really challenging.
Yeah.
I think also there's tics that, as we also talked about, that are socially unacceptable. It's like your body wants to do things that aren't really accepted, within the society that we live in. And, people are going to look at you like something strange is happening. They just don't know. And so that's hard. And then I also think, tics can come with, for me, I live with chronic pain, and, I have arthritis in certain parts of my body because of my movements. Yeah. And so also stress. Tics are really stressful because I think that what sometimes people without tic disorders, it's harder to understand, is that it's basically, for me anyway, tics consume me, I would say, most of the time. Whether if I am ticking, it's like I'm trying to do a task and I can't, because my tic is trying to do something that I'm like not wanting to do. I can't achieve the task, and it's taking me a lot longer. Or if I'm not ticking, I'm thinking about ticking. I'm trying to suppress my tic as long as I can. So there's just a lot of subtleties that go with it. And I think tics can be subtle. So people might notice that, okay, maybe I move my arm, that's a tic. But not really knowing that it's all these little ways. I might move my toe in a certain way and I have to get it just right. I might move my eye in a certain way. I have to get it just right. There's all these tics that can kind of go together too and happen at simultaneously. And so there's just a lot happening that I think is really hard. And I think there's just misunderstanding when it comes to those experiences.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like there's definitely misunderstanding in people in general, like about what tics are, what they can look like. People just kind of think about what they see on the media. And then, of course, There's been, a lot of new talk about the rise in ticks recently since the pandemic, and is TikTok causing it? And I know there was an episode on this a while back. So for anybody listening, if you want to learn about that, there's an episode back in season 7 about that. But there's definitely that stigma in society. And I feel like it also goes along with culture, there's people that see me in public that are, when I'm ticking, and because of the color of my skin, they might automatically assume that instead of it being a disorder, it could be, oh, she's just on drugs or something like that. So that's always definitely a challenge. For me, when it comes to the upsides of it, I want to look more into this. I'll probably just ask a whole bunch of people and start kind of interviewing people and doing a little research or something. But I really do feel like people with tics and Tourette syndrome, there's a certain advantage we have to people that don't. I'm not saying we're better than them, but I think that there is something that, our brains are wired differently, right? We're neurodivergent. There's something that comes with it. I know some people have said that they're really good at multitasking because they're used to ticking and listening to a lecture, or ticking and, cooking, or whatever the case may be. I feel like sometimes people have quicker reflexes. I've had tics where I do things and almost knock it over, and then in the same movement catch it, and people are like, what? But yeah, I think not everybody, but a lot of people, if they kind of sit down and think about it, there might be something that they might have an advantage at because of their Tourette syndrome. So I think that's one of the upsides, whether it be, like I said, being able to multitask really well, or having quicker reflexes. I think that's pretty cool. Kind of I don't know, kind of makes me feel like X-Men. Everybody kind of had a little special ability. I'm hoping that everybody can discover their special ability or advantage that they get because of Tourette syndrome. And I think another one of the upsides that comes with it is like you said, self-compassion is something that, I'm still working on as well. Everybody kind of thinks of just compassion and compassion for others and being more empathetic of others. And that's definitely one of the things that comes along with it. But I think having self-compassion is really important too. Something that not a lot of people might think about.
Yeah, I appreciate that take on it. I was just kind of thinking about what would be some of the kind of the strengths that I might have when it comes to that. And it's something I hadn't really considered a lot about before, but I think it's a good point to ponder a little bit more on. But when you mentioned things like reflexes, I think I noticed that too. You can kind of tackle a little bit more. And at least for me, I don't know if this is the case for you, but it's I'm definitely aware of the movements. I know when they're happening. I know when they're about to happen. And so it's I can, say I'm out driving, I can know when it's okay and when it isn't okay to tick, obviously to maintain my safety and the safety of others. So there is this kind of added level of awareness too.
Same. Yeah, that's me. I have that premonitory urge, that kind of feeling or sensation in my body before the tick happens. And it's usually in the same part where it happens, if it's an eye tick, it's usually the back of my eyes, versus, something with my arm is kind of more in my elbow. So I definitely do the same thing. It is an art, let me tell you, to be driving and knowing that there's I have several different eye ticks. I have the, pretty common long blink tick. I have one where my eyebrows kind of raise and my eyelids close, but my eyes aren't really squinted. That happens for a couple seconds. I have eye rolling tics. I have eye darting tics where my eyes just kind of shake around like an earthquake. always interesting. And yeah, I have several. So trying to not have that happen while I'm driving and just waiting to like a stoplight or something to let that out is definitely, that takes some skill. Like we got some skill. It takes some skill for sure.
Does. And I think one of the things that I've heard before from folks, and I imagine people might wonder about, and it's a valid question, is this idea of, well, it sounds like you can suppress your tics then if you're saying, you can do it in these moments. And I think, yes, we can do that to a degree, but as we were talking a bit about earlier, there's this buildup. It's like, if you don't do it right this instant, okay, maybe you can wait a little bit. I think for everybody that timeline looks different. But if you don't do it, it just builds up and builds up and builds up and builds up and builds up. And you have to do it at some point. So it's not like you can just suppress it and, okay, so we're good now. The tic just goes away. For me, it does not go away.
No, it doesn't.
But there's certain things, there's certain kinds of treatments and things that, they kind of work with that a little bit of how do we deal with tics. But I haven't done those kinds of treatment. And I know that it's called, so CBIT. I'm sure you're familiar with that. It's a therapy for tic disorders and Tourette syndrome, which I'm actually looking at pursuing if I can, get a provider that's accessible to me in my area.
Sure.
But that's a thing too. It's like it's hard. It's really challenging to suppress them, for a lengthy amount of time.
Yeah, for sure. And I think since, the pandemic, with everybody dealing with COVID, people that don't know what it's like to suppress kind of now have probably had that experience. I'm sure you've probably been somewhere, or, if you're listening, I'm sure you know what it's like to be in public and feel the need to cough, but you're like, I didn't want to cough because then everybody's going to think I have COVID. So you try to suppress your cough, but that only works for so long. It's kind of the same with tics. You can suppress it for a bit, but like you said, it's a buildup. It only works so long. And then by the time you do have to let all your tics out, it's like an explosion. So
yeah.
For sure. For sure. Would you be willing to share any advice for maybe somebody who is newly experiencing tics, or maybe even for like if parents are just discovering that their child has tics and they're just kind of at a point where they don't really know what to do, they don't really know what to expect. Would you have any advice for them?
I think the first thing that comes to mind is really this idea that you are not alone, because it can feel really scary. It can feel really isolating to know that you or a loved one has a tic disorder or Tourette syndrome. It can feel really scary just not knowing what does that mean.
Right.
And I think just knowing that there is support out there for you. I know for me, I've found different kinds of support groups. I know on social media, I found it going to things like the Tourette conference, getting involved. I think for some people, that means, consulting with a neurologist. There's a lot of different kinds of options out there for you. So just to know that it's a very personal choice how you want to pursue options. It is hard, but you're not alone.
Yeah, that's really good advice. Thank you for that. Is there anything else that you want to talk about, or any other topics you'd like to bring up?
Yeah, I think for me, talking a bit about myths, I think that there's a lot of myths out there in society.
For sure.
So I think one of the things that I think about is even just, I've heard it a lot, and maybe you have too, this idea that for kids and adolescents actually is where Tourette is most prevalent. And there might be some truth to that, where for, many kids do have it and then it kind of subsides a bit as you get older. But I think in a way that can be damaging, at least in my opinion, because there's a lot of us adults that do actually live with Tourette's, and it has a pretty significant impact on our lives. And so just recognizing that it can impact anybody at any age. And I think another common misconception is that, there's this media portrayal when it comes to Tourette syndrome, and that is that tics really is primarily swearing, and people make jokes about it of, okay, I have Tourette syndrome, when really they don't. And so I think that can be really problematic to those of us who do have it, and I think creates a lot of just perpetuates really those misunderstandings too.
Yeah, for sure. I know with the topic of like growing out of tics, if you have it as a kid, you'll grow out of it. It's a potential. Like I know there are people that may grow out of it, but there are also people that won't. And it kind of gives this like false hope for them as they're getting older, like, okay, well, maybe now I'll grow out of it. Well, maybe now. Instead of, I feel like for physicians and specialists, instead of saying you will grow out of it, that sounds more definite. You can say that there is a chance that you might grow out of it. So if they do, then okay, they do. If it subsides just a little bit, okay, it subsides just a little bit. And if it doesn't, and it's the same or worse, then okay, well, there was a chance and it was possible. I think that's kind of damaging to people. And I also think, everybody thinks as soon as they hear, Tourette syndrome, they just assume it's only, cursing or flicking people off. And about 10% of people that have tic disorders do deal with that. So it is a thing, but it's not all of what Tourette syndrome is or all of what tic disorders are, for sure.
Thank you so much, Jhonelle. Thank you so much, Shawna. There were so many highlights, and I want to hear from you, the listener, on that. Your feedback to the conversation we just heard. Tourette'sPodcast@gmail.com or hit the contact form at Tourette'sPodcast.com. You can write in about anything you want. A question, a comment. You can tell me what your favorite horror movie is, or give me a recipe for a weird sandwich, or whatever you want. It's always good hearing from you, and thank you for that. You can also head to the Tourette's Podcast discussion group on Facebook, run by the best admin in the history of discussion group admins, and that's Sophia in the UK. Hello to the community of listeners there in the UK. We have listeners on every populated continent. I'm not sure if there's anyone working on a science base in Antarctica or something. That would be cool to find out, but I'm happy to say that if it's a continent with a full-time population, we've got listeners there, and I couldn't be more stoked about that. Thanks to the Tourette Association of America for sponsoring this podcast for yet another season. So cool to have that connection, these conversations. TAA makes it possible for me to do this, and so do you. The podcast has a Patreon. That's patreon.com/Tourette's Podcast. If you want to buy the host a cup of coffee, that kind of thing. Never expected, but always extremely appreciated. Thanks also to Geeks Rising, geeksrising.com. That's the podcast network that brings Tourette's Podcast to a greater listening audience, a general listening audience. So it's not just people with Tourette syndrome listening. We want to have a general audience, and Geeks Rising is definitely making that possible. This podcast and others at geeksrising.com. You can follow us on our social media channels, Instagram, Twitter, and thank you for listening and supporting this podcast week to week. We'll talk to you again soon. This is Ben.